It was a dismal time following the horrors of Diablo's rise and the darkening of Tristram. I longed to know the truth of what had happened in the final hours before the horrors were ended, but the man who emerged from beneath the cursed cathedral was not the same courageous warrior who had ventured into the catacombs to rescue his brother. Aiden increasingly shunned the company of others. He spent his days in isolation and roamed the streets at night, seemingly without direction or purpose. Indeed, the witch Adria appeared to be the only person capable of offering comfort to Aiden during this sorrowful period. As the rest of the town struggled to recover in the aftermath of Diablo's reign of terror, Aiden and Adria spent long nights behind closed doors. Tristram had become a quiet and sleepy hamlet once again. Tales had spread across Sanctuary of the town that had drawn the bravest adventurers in the world, like flies to the spider's web, only to meet their doom. It was many days after Aiden's harrowing journey to save his brother that the haunted warrior spoke to me. He confided in me the truth then of what he had faced in the lowest depths of the catacombs. Aiden and the adventurers who had survived to the end found themselves in an area the broken young man described as the threshold of hell itself. There, they had encountered the most fearful abomination of any they had yet faced. Diablo, a nightmare incarnate, a terrifying horned demon of the color of blood. They battled desperately, but the struggle was not merely physical. The demon forced Aiden to relive his worst nightmares, his greatest failures, and his fears that he would never live up to the expectations of his father. But, convinced that he might still save his brother, Aiden fought through the worst of what Diablo inflicted. The group of adventurers wore down the demon, and ultimately it was Aiden who delivered the killing blow, only to watch the abomination shift before his very eyes into the form of his young brother Albrecht. Diablo had possessed the boy's body and twisted into a physical representation of living terror. I can only imagine that Aiden's mind was shattered upon realizing that he had killed his only brother. When Aiden finished his recounting, he whispered several times, I thought I could contain it. I thought I could contain it. He went on to mumble a number of disturbing things, including something about his brothers awaiting him in the Far East. I knew Aiden was troubled by what he had experienced, and at that time I interpreted what he said as meaningless ramblings. The next day, Aiden was gone. I spoke with Adria soon after his departure, and learned that the warrior had traveled east to seek out mystics who might exorcise the waking nightmare that plagued him. As I meditate back on those days, there is much I would have liked to have asked of Aiden and Adria before they left, as well as many others in town. Unfortunately, such a confused and fetid air hung upon the world back then that I was not thinking clearly. Nor, I suspect, were any of the other remaining citizens of Tristram. Although I did not succumb, as did so many others, to this wave of insanity that swept the land, I did receive a wound to my spirit that I have not recovered from to this day. Dark thoughts always live at the edge of my mind, like vultures awaiting a feast. I must now, regrettably, tell of the most troubling time of my life. It was mere weeks after Diablo's defeat that Tristram fell once again to demons. It was only after the town was utterly destroyed, and nearly all those who remained were slaughtered and raised from the dead, that I myself was taken prisoner. We had no indication where the demons had come from, but even in my weakened state, I surmised that the cause of their appearance was to ensure that no able-bodied combatants were left alive to follow Aiden to the east. It was then that a horrifying realization dawned on me as I recalled Aiden's words. I thought I could contain it. Could it be that Aiden was wrestling with the spirit of Diablo himself? And if so, What were his true intentions in going east? Regardless, the most important piece of all this is that I survived, and I did so thanks to the efforts of a handful of brave and noble individuals. They had been made aware of my plight and the hellish creature assailing Tristram. Many had traveled from the far corners of the world, among them a noble paladin of the Sakaroon, a brooding necromancer from the east jungles, and a powerful Amazon from the Skov Isles, an enigmatic sorceress from Kyrgyzstan, and a mighty barbarian from the slopes of Mount Ariad itself. Together they fought with courage such as I'd rarely seen, and ultimately they saved me from the jaws of death. My greatest concern, however, was not for my own well-being. I quickly shared with the heroes my true fear. The Diablo, lurking within Aiden's tortured soul, was guiding the troubled warrior to release the other two prime evils that the Horadrim had imprisoned so long ago. For if Aiden released both Baal and Mephisto, humankind would surely suffer an age of darkness and despair beyond imagining. With this, then, in mind, I convinced the group of champions to travel eastward to intercept Aiden and thwart Diablos' plans. Early on in Aiden's journey, he had crossed paths with an unfortunate soul named Marius. Much of what I know now regarding the events I'm about to convey, I'd retrieved from the remains of a cell within a burnt-out sanitarium in Westmarch. It was there that Marius, his mind shattered from the time he had spent with Aiden, had carved the accounts of his experience into the floor of his cell with his own fingernails. Fortunately, these writings were still legible despite the damage to Marius' room. During this time, I referred to Aiden as the Dark Wanderer. After his departure from Tristram, he sought passage to the eastern ports of Lutgulain, passing through the East Gate Monastery. Aiden encountered the Sisters of the Sightless Eye, many of whom had recently been corrupted by the Maiden of Anguish and Dariel. As with the other demons who invaded Tristram, Andariel had arrived to prevent Aiden's pursuers from interfering with the Wanderer's dire mission. I speculate now that following the Dark Exile and the Prime Evil's banishment, Andariel and her twin brother Duriel concluded that the Primes would inevitably use the innate power of man to reclaim the Burning Hells. Therefore, they endeavored to gain favor with the Lord of Terror by protecting his human host. In any case, the mighty champion who had liberated me from my prison soon faced the Maiden of Anguish. She struck at them physically, but battered them emotionally as well, stirring within each of them memories of loss, sadness, betrayal, and regret, feeding on their angst and relishing their despair, despite the heavy toll on their minds of those she attacked. The hunter succeeded in dispatching Andariel after a long and hard-fought battle. Though the Maiden of Anguish had not succeeded in killing Aiden's pursuers, she was successful in one respect. She bought the Dark Wanderer time to reach his destination. After traversing the arid desert of Aranok, the heroes arrived at Lutgulain, hot on the Wanderer's heels. It wasn't until they reached the very tombs where the mage Talrasa wrestled with the Lord Demon Baal that they finally cornered their prey. There, within Talrasha's chamber, the group faced with Duriel, the Lord of Pain, who, like his sister, had pledged his loyalty to Diablo. Duriel exacted a heavy toll upon the heroes, savoring the agonized screams of the wounded, though hopelessly fatigued, both mentally and physically. The mortal champions overcame the Maggot King, slaying him as they had slain his sister. But again, time was of the essence. As the heroes arrived at Talrasha's tomb, they realized they were too late to prevent Baal's release. To their amazement, Tyrael himself was present. He had arrived there and grappled with Aiden, hoping to prevent him from liberating Baal. Through some means of cruel manipulation, Baal had convinced Marius to remove the amber shard lodged in Talrasha's body, thus freeing him. Aiden and Talrasha, the latter then fully controlled by Baal, turned their combined might on Tyrael. Knowing that he would not prevail against its foes, the Archangel of Justice had ordered Marius to take Bael's soulstone into the burning hells and shatter it within the Hellforge. As the cowering mortal departed the tomb, Aiden and Tal Rasha overwhelmed Tyrael. By the time of the heroes' arrival at the tomb, the two prime evils had already set sail across the twin seas to the eastern ports of Kurast. The mortal heroes quickly gave chase and nearly caught up with them again. But still, the Dark Wanderer managed to escape their grasp. Soon Aiden and Tal Rasha arrived at the temple city of Travancal, then held to be the holiest site in Sakarum. It was there, deep within the bowels of the magnificent temple, that Mephistos' sapphire soulstone was kept. As mentioned earlier, many of the greatest Sakarum paladins and their commanders had already been corrupted by Mephistos' vile influence long before Aiden and Tal Rasha arrived. It has been documented that Sankurum, the Quehagen, or Supreme Patriarch of the Sakarum Church, had fallen under Mephistos' control. This much is certain. Not everyone at the temple was corrupt, and Travancal was easily the most heavily guarded site in all of Kyrgyzstan. Regardless, the Wanderer would not be denied. Eyewitness reports suggest that many of the temple's defenders fell prey to overwhelming fear and fled the complex altogether. Additional reports suggest that many more turned against each other, further decimating the Sakarum's ranks. These accounts undoubtedly evidence the influence of the Lords of Terror and Destruction. Ultimately, the Wanderer and Tal Rasha made their way into the temple's innermost chamber, where Mephistos' soulstone was kept. There, they released Mephisto, who quickly took physical possession of the holy Quehagen. The tortured body of the Sakarum leader transformed into a hideous visage of Mephistos' demonic form. And thus, after nearly 3 centuries apart, the prime evils were united once again. Within that chamber, the Primes devised a final stratagem to retake the Burning Hells and claim vengeance upon those who overthrew them. This included their long-sought goal to corrupt the World Stone, thereby enslaving all of humankind and its Nephilim potential to their will. With an army of Nephilim as their vanguard, the Primes would quickly overwhelm the Hells' traitorous legions and re-establish their infernal reign for all time. To accomplish this, the Primes combined their powers to open a portal that will allow them access to their former domain. It was then that Diablo finally cast off the mortal visage of Prince Aiden and assumed his true demonic form. Intent on rallying the legions within Hell still loyal to the Three, Diablo crossed through the shimmering portal. Bael began his long journey north to corrupt the World Stone, while Mephisto alone remained, bent on destroying any and all opposing their plan. When the mortal heroes arrived in Kurast, the city had already been overrun by demonic hordes. Bloody combats was waged in the streets as the heroes fought to gain entrance into Travancal. Once inside, they faced not only demons, but also the corrupt zealots of the High Council members of the Sakarum faith. At the time, I doubt it occurred to the champions that they were toppling with the world's greatest religion, but such was the case. Nonetheless, they continued down the deepest recesses of the temple, where they finally faced Mephisto. In the fevered combat that ensued, Mephisto worked diligently to turn the hunters' own anger and distrust back against them. But despite the long hunt and the many grueling hours of battle, in the end, the heroes defeated Mephisto and trapped his essence within the Sapphire Soulstone. It was not long after this victory that I arrived to survey the carnage wrought by this terrible conflict. And though it pained me greatly, I knew that the heroes' battle was not over. For if Diablo were gathering an army from the Burning Hells, he would most assuredly return and carry out the Prime's plans despite our efforts. Those who had fought so hard, for so long, did not hesitate. They drove through the portal without a backwards glance. And I somehow summoned the courage to follow them. The gateway we entered, however, did not lead directly to hell. Instead, it allowed access to the breathtaking Pandemonium Fortress, the abandoned bastion that once housed the Worldstone. Even as my senses reeled, I wondered why the primevals had chosen to open a portal there. Perhaps to allow Diablo furtive access to the Hells. Whatever the case, it meant that perhaps there was still time. The Pandemonium Fortress was the most incredible, astonishing, and perplexing place my mortal eyes had ever beheld. Colors, shapes, textures, none seemed as they should. My surroundings pulsed as I shifted before my eyes. I was overwhelmed, but determined also to offer whatever assistance I might to the heroes who pursued Diablo. It was then that my eyes fell upon the shining visage of Teriel. Not wanting to directly intervene and risk the high heavens learning what had befallen Sanctuary, the Archangel regretted that he could not venture into the Hells at the mortals' side. But he offered insight, a theory, a chance, perhaps, to eliminate both Mephisto and Diablo once and for all. He spoke of the Hellforge, located in the deepest pit of the Realm of Destruction. It was here that the demonic smiths forged Hell's most powerful weapons. Thus, it was said that the dread Hellforge held many unholy avails, and among them was the Anvil of Annihilation. It was upon this anvil that the angelic weapons and artifacts were destroyed. Legends held that anything broken upon the Anvil of Annihilation, no matter how powerful, would be forever negated. The hunters possessed Mephisto's soulstone already. Teriel theorized that if they somehow overcame Diablo and trapped his essence as well, then perhaps both soulstones could be shattered upon the anvil. Therefore, in theory, the demon lords themselves would be obliterated and their souls cast into some unseen netherworld. It is staggering to think back upon that moment. For who could ask such a thing of mere mortals? Teriel did not have to ask. Without hesitation, the pursuers charged headlong into the fires of the burning hells, while Teriel remained behind to serve as my protector. The champions fought their way across the nightmarish landscape, and reached the volatile realm of destruction, seeking the mythic Hellforge. I can scarcely imagine what horrors they faced and overcame. But their spirit and will proved indomitable. They stood at the smoldering rim of the Hellforge, and there, upon the Anvil of Annihilation, the heroes shattered Mephisto's soulstone. The heroes then tracked down Diablo. Despite the odds against them, they succeeded in overtaking the Lord of Terror. Once again, dear listener, the sheer tenacity of the human heart proved victorious, for the heroes achieved the impossible. They vanquished Diablo within his own realm. As they pulled the Crimson Soulstone from Diablo's corpse, the demon's massive form began to wither. They set about trapping Diablo's essence within the Soulstone, and when they succeeded, Diablo's disintegrated husk took the form of Prince Aiden. In honor of the prince's memory, the champions ceremoniously wrapped the broken body and threw it into the infernal fires that raged all around them. With Diablo's Soulstone in their possession, the belly-geared heroes made their way back to the Hellforge and sundered the artifact upon the Anvil of Annihilation. The first-hand accounts of the champions tells us that when both Mephisto's and Diablo's soulstones were shattered, a similar fate befell the primes. A scream such as no human being had ever heard rent the air, followed by a black and intangible nothingness opening before the heroes. They averted their eyes, as the wailing souls of Diablo and Mephisto were swallowed by the yawning darkness. Upon hearing this, I remember the writings of my ancestor Jared Kane, who reported a theory held by Sultan Kul, that the spirits of angels and demons could be banished to a place beyond even heaven or hell. A place called the Abyss. When I think back on the champions and their experience at the Hellforge, I know in my bones that Diablo and Mephisto were cast somewhere that would make even them feel fear. And, though it seems morbid, I must be honest and admit that this thought gives me some comfort. Regardless, With the shattering of the Soul Stones, yet another chapter in the struggle of humankind against the agents of the burning hells had come to an end. Questions, of course, remained, and years later I would glean at the details concerning Aiden and his possession by the Lord of Terror. It was revealed to me that upon defeating Diablo in the catacombs beneath Tristram, Aiden had thrust the Crimson Soulstone into his own forehead in an effort to trap the essence of Diablo within himself. Now I wonder whether, perhaps it was Diablo's plan all along, to lure the world's greatest champions down into the depths, to test their strength and resolve, and, in so doing, find the perfect host for his all-devouring evil. How much of Aiden was in control when he left Tristram striking out to the east? Was it truly his intention to exorcise the demon from within himself? Or was it the voice of Diablo whispering deep in his mind, convincing him that these thoughts were his own? We may never know. But I tell you this, dear listener, regarding the final battle with Diablo, when the champions fought him in the midst of the burning hells, I now believe, looking back on those events, that a small measure of Aiden remained, fighting the will of Diablo. Perhaps it was not only the heroes who overcame the Lord of Terror, but also Aiden, who contended with the demon from within. As I say, this is not proven, but simply my belief, and it is beliefs like this which may provide some slim hope, even in the face of ultimate despair.